Well, welcome everyone who's joining so far. I think we'll give it another minute before we get started, just to let folks join the meeting. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome today to the Rainforest Innovation Forum. I'm Lisa Kutula, and I'm President and Chief Economic Development Officer of UNM Rainforest Innovations. And I am pleased today to have as our speaker, Victor Hwang. And I'll do a brief introduction and then turn it over to Victor. Before I introduce Victor fully, though, I want to acknowledge Bob Nath and David Foster, who are two board members of UNM Rainforest Innovations, and they are actually the co-chairs of this forum. So thank you for your support in providing this opportunity for us. So Victor and I have known each other for about 7 or 8 years now, I think. And he was the inspiration for many of our endeavors using the rainforest theme. And he wrote a book in 2012 that is called The Rainforest. And we adopted that in 2013 at the University of New Mexico as our template for building an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I'm sure Victor is going to talk a little bit about the rainforest in his remarks. He's had a stellar career. He's worked as an attorney, he's worked as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and in more recent years, he's worked to really build the job creation and entrepreneurial ecosystem in the US, which is so critical for our economic growth. And he will tell you about Right to Start, which is his current endeavor, and that will be part of his presentation. We are at Rainforest Innovations. We're actually working with Victor and Right to Start on an initiative in New Mexico, which he'll tell you about. Prior to starting the nonprofit Right to Start, he was Vice President of Entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation. He also had an investment company in Silicon Valley and has been the CEO of a number of startups as part of his career. So we are really fortunate to have Victor here to speak with us and work with us to build our entrepreneurial culture and ecosystem here in New Mexico. So thank you, Victor.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you all for being here and being so supportive of the ideas of the rainforest, and more so having the courage and the tenacity to bring these ideas to life within the New Mexico ecosystem. It's been amazing to watch that ecosystem grow over the years, and have really enjoyed watching the things flourish and watching the new ideas and the innovation start to happen there. So I'm really excited to talk with you about what we're working on now, which is this idea of the right to start. And it really is the logical extension and natural extension of the rainforest ideas that we've been talking about for so many years, which is, how do you take innovation where it's not just something that benefits a few people, but really is a tool that becomes democratized and available for everybody, to be able to lift up all of society, to lift up anyone that has an ambition to build something, to solve a problem, to create something new, and to give them the tools to do it. And by doing that, I think that's how we can create a more prosperous and equitable and sustainable society. And so I'm really pleased to talk with you about the Right to Start and share with you the work that we've been doing here. So what I'll do is I'll talk about this work in Right to Start, and let's see, full page, Zoom. Does that work? No. Hold on. Full screen mode. There we go. All right. I know you guys saw that before me. Okay. So with Right to Start, we are really building a campaign to expand entrepreneurial opportunity for everyone. And this is the idea that the voices of those that have dreams and ambitions of how to create something new and to create something of value in the world are really quite broad spread. There are a lot of people with great ideas and talents and opportunities, but we haven't really made that opportunity accessible for everybody in an equal way. And so that's what the Right to Start is really tackling, and really proud to work on this with you in New Mexico. And we'll talk about the future work we're doing together. So first, to talk about the rainforest a little bit and explain how we got to where we got to within New Mexico. So this is me right before the pandemic. I had the privilege of visiting the rainforest offices. And this is a picture, of course, with two very good-looking, charismatic people, and then me standing next to them in the building. And for those of you that might not be familiar with the rainforest concept, it really is very simply this, which is that human societies are like natural rainforests. That is, we're dynamic, interconnected webs of relationships, and that we can't create prosperity by doing things without that web of connections and the relationships that happen. And so natural ecosystems are the same as human ecosystems in that way. And you can contrast what that means if you think about the difference between farms and rainforests. So in a farming system, we know what we want to grow in advance. We have a very clear idea of how many crops we want to create. We know we want to plant corn, say, and the goal is to maximize the yield of that corn by irrigating properly, by maximizing the yield of that crop, by doing everything we can to grow lots and lots of the same type of corn. And if we get a weed on a farm, of course, well, what do we do with weeds? We kill weeds. We don't want weeds to flourish in farms. You're not seeing my full screen mode. Oh. Okay, let's see. You don't see any of this? Oh, I know what I gotta do. I see. I gotta share something different. Here we go. Are you seeing this now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. So here we go. So here's the picture. You can see the picture now. Okay, great. So the idea, of course, is the difference between farms and rainforest. And so on a farms, we maximize things like crops. But if you have a weed, you kill the weeds on farms. But if you think about a rainforest, on the other hand, rainforests are lush environments with all sorts of plants. But what's a weed in a rainforest? Well, everything's a weed in a rainforest because you never know what something is going to grow into. It could very well be the most valuable plant in the entire rainforest. You just don't know until you've given it a chance to really grow and flourish. And so the idea with the rainforest is that you have to give all the weeds a chance to grow. But the way to grow rainforests is not to plant lots of trees. The way to do it is to actually grow the web of relationships. So you, just like in a natural rainforest, you control, it's the sunlight, it's the humidity, it's the interaction of all the flora and fauna in an environment. The same in a human system. If you want to create innovation, you have to nourish the creation of weeds through all the different relationships that feed it. And within an entrepreneurial, innovative society, everything matters. So the web of relationships isn't just the small business community, let's say, or the technology sector. It touches upon government and policy and capital and civic leadership and the culture of a community and the relationships that form the educational system, the tax systems, all the regulatory systems, everything that's involved in life, everything that's involved in a community, everything that touches economic livelihood affects the entrepreneurial innovation process. And so with Right to Start, that's really what we're trying to tackle, is to say, how do we take that very concept and start to embed that into the very way we govern a society? So I was able to launch this organization. We really just went public with this organization a little over a year ago. And so it's been a pretty rapid ride for us. And we've got a great number of people who've helped us launch this idea of this Right to Start. And the Right to Start, really, we've got a number of folks like Kim Lane, who is our Chief Operating Officer, who comes out of a background in involved in building entrepreneurial ecosystems across the country, has advised on this work in other parts of the world. Jason Grill is former state legislator who was instrumental in starting the Kauffman Foundation's Mayors Conference, which helped mayors develop new policy frameworks to support entrepreneurship across the US. Henry Miller, who comes from a background in PR out of New York, where he's worked with a lot of major media firms. Sheila Herling, who used to work at the Case Foundation, where I worked with her closely over there, who's been involved in philanthropy and government and policy making. Kai Cash, who's a venture capitalist in New York, who's also been involved in our development and partnerships work. And I won't go into every single person involved, but we've got a great number of people. They come from all different walks of life who've been involved in this. And the team really has got deep roots into different aspects of entrepreneurship innovation across the country. Yes, please put questions in the chat. I would be happy to talk through any questions you have as we go as well. And we've also built a network of ambassadors. These are people across the country who are influencers and thought leaders in their communities who've been supportive of entrepreneurship and innovation in many different aspects. And so these are folks like Matt Hagman in the middle there, who is leading the economic development strategy for Miami-Dade County. Trey Bowles in the bottom left corner, who the mayor of Dallas tapped for co-chairing his task force on innovation and entrepreneurship, and others who've been involved in entrepreneurship in many different forums and real leaders in driving change. So we've been able to build out this network, and now we've grown to the point now where we have 18 ambassadors across the country. So it's even bigger than this list now, and it's continuing to grow. We're getting more and more people involved in this work who are able to open doors, shape environments of civic engagement and policy making and leadership. So a little bit more about Right to Start and why we think this really matters in the work we're doing now, and why this is an important time in the country. Let's see, here we go, okay. So the system makes it far too hard to start and grow a business. And more than ever, we need starters to drive economic recovery and advance economic justice. And the reason we say this is because we know how important entrepreneurship is. So this is something that a decade ago, when I wrote The Rainforest, this data wasn't even totally understood at the time, but now we know just how important it is. We know, for instance, that almost all net job growth in an economy comes from young firms. That is, it doesn't come from old big firms, it comes from the young firms. In fact, the research shows that firms younger than 5 years drive almost all net job growth. Firms that are between 6 and 10 years old actually net zero over time. And firms that are older than 10 years old actually net negative over time. That is, during downturns, they shed jobs. They're always trying to increase their efficiency, like crop production, and they actually shed jobs. Whereas it's the young firms that add jobs. And so there's a big contrast if you think about how we talk about job growth in this country. When we think about jobs, what do we usually think about in the news? We think about large corporations. We think about the companies that make the headlines, and the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times are the big corporations. But if you actually look at what actually happens, it's the new young businesses that are driving job growth. But they don't get a lot of attention. We kind of ignore it in the press. That's job growth. We also know what else happens, which is that entrepreneurship drives GDP, because it is the source of where the innovation comes from in an economy, and that innovation is actually what drives GDP over time. We also know it raises incomes. So every 1% increase in the rate of entrepreneurship in an economy actually increases household income across an entire economy by roughly $400 across a community. We also know that it increases lifetime earnings. Not necessarily short-term earnings, because when you're an entrepreneur, it's very hard in the first few years to get going. But over people's lifetimes, those that start businesses tend to make more earnings. We also know it correlates with fighting poverty. The more entrepreneurship in a state, the lower the poverty rate. About 1% increase in entrepreneurship correlates to about a 2% decrease in the poverty rate in a state. And we know it's tied to inequality. That is, the more entrepreneurs in a region, the less inequality there tends to be. So this is something that is becoming very, very important, but we haven't really given it the public attention that it deserves. You don't really hear entrepreneurship talked about as a solution to some of these grand economic questions or challenges. We still tend to think of it as kind of a separate issue. It's kind of something where we treat the entrepreneurs and the small businesses as nice to have things. They're kind of we kind of wish them well, and we wish them good luck, even though politicians talk all the time about small businesses as the backbone of an economy. They don't really have a lot to say about what to do. And I think it comes down to this issue, which is people want to know what to do. We actually need to come up with a plan of action on this. And so that's what Right to Start is. Right to Start is actually a plan of action to lift the voices of the entrepreneurs who've been forgotten from the system. And so that's how we're tackling this work and how we're moving forward. Let me see if I can, it's moving. There we go. Okay. So the way we're doing this is by making it easier for entrepreneurs to succeed by three things: changing minds, changing policies, and changing communities. By changing minds, it's lifting the voices of entrepreneurs that usually are not heard and getting them into the media, getting them into the narrative, getting them to be voices that are heard. So we do this by having entrepreneurs write op-eds. We have entrepreneurs in meetings with policymakers and elected officials, entrepreneurs engaged in their community, talking about entrepreneurs and the challenges that they face. We're doing this work with policies. So we're actually fighting to change policies. Just a few months ago, the Missouri House of Representatives passed the first ever Right to Start Act. This is the most comprehensive pro-entrepreneur state legislation ever proposed. And we got to the Missouri House. We're getting ready for the Missouri Senate next. And now we have 4 other states. So we'll have 5 states at least that are interested in introducing Right to Start Acts in 2022. So we're starting to build a movement on legislative reform for entrepreneurs. And what's interesting about this is, as I was saying, it's not just one aspect of the ecosystem. It's not entrepreneurs as a tech issue purely, or as a capital issue purely, or as a tax issue. It's actually entrepreneurship and innovation as a broad-based issue that cuts across regulation, capital, taxes, non-compete reform, educational systems, economic development systems, workforce systems, government contracting, et cetera. And if you think about all the things that touch on entrepreneurs, that's what this work is trying to do, is to say everything affects entrepreneurship. And so if we want to create a more pro-entrepreneur society, we've got to tackle all of these policies all at one time. And that's what these Right to Start Acts are. They're actually comprehensive bills that tackle lots of issues together. And then changing communities. And this is the work we're doing at the grassroots level, where we're organizing and mobilizing field organizers in communities right now. So right now we have 6 cities that we're building active grassroots operations in Right to Start. We've got 3 where we've hired people on the ground as local organizers and activists. And then we've got 3 more we're in the process of working on, including in New Mexico. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So what will the nation look like when we actually build this new civic infrastructure that unleashes the right to start for everybody? More jobs, more productivity, less inequality, higher incomes, and broader opportunity. And for me, I look at a lot of the anger in this country that's emerged in recent years as really an outcome of what happens when people don't feel like there's a path for them, when they don't feel like they have control of their economic lives, when they feel like there's no chance to express themselves, to create something of their own, and to build a pathway for themselves, to earn a livelihood, to earn some independence, to earn some control of their lives. And so that's what we're really trying to do, is to by expanding the right to start, by expanding opportunity, we're giving people a way to take back power over their own lives and their own economic futures. So some examples of what we've been doing in different communities, and also what we hope to do in New Mexico. Here we go. Okay. So here are communities, some examples where we've been doing work on the ground in Illinois, in Missouri, in Arkansas, in Texas, and in Florida. These are examples of what our ambassadors and our advocates, our organizers, as well as the main organization, are doing in different places across the country. In Illinois, our ambassador, Jake Hammond, was the mayor's lead advisor on entrepreneurship and innovation. And a lot of our ideas from Right to Start on entrepreneur-led economic growth got embedded into Peoria's economic recovery plan. And they hosted their first ever mayor's candidate forum on entrepreneurship recently, which was something where the people that were running to be the mayor of Peoria had to have points of view and express their thoughts and feedback on pro-entrepreneur ideas, and have the entrepreneurs engage in that dialogue with them. And this is the kind of candidate forum and kind of exchange we're looking at doing more of in 2022, and thinking about how we start to elevate the issues around entrepreneurship, moving even into the presidential cycle in 2024. In Dallas, I mentioned Trey Bowles. our ambassador was the co-chair of the mayor's task force on entrepreneurship there. They published a roadmap, which includes some policy issues from Right to Start. And Trey actually took a lot of the lessons he learned from the work in Dallas and shared it without our network of ambassadors. It's not 12 now, we've got 18 ambassadors and it's growing. So that kind of shared learning starts to ripple out across different communities. Once you're part of this network, you start to share in the learning across different communities. And so that's one of the strengths we have is you have strength in numbers, you get confidence in numbers, and by increasing the size of our network, we're actually adding peer power and interconnected networks to expand this work across the country. In Florida, our ambassador is Matt Hagman, and he's been helping us in a number of ways, including introducing us to Mayor Suarez in Miami, Florida State Senator Chevron Jones, and others. And we put together a Start Show, which is a video production to feature the entrepreneurial ecosystem in different communities across the country. And we've done them in Tulsa, Peoria, and Miami. We're getting ready to release one in Arkansas. And we're in the planning process of thinking about how we showcase New Mexico in a Start Show or other type of video feature like that. We also, I write regularly in Inc. magazine, and we feature the work that Miami and Mayor Suarez are doing for entrepreneurs there, where they greatly shorten the amount of bureaucratic burden and regulatory process for new business permits in the city of Miami. We actually have already hired a Miami advocate, so that's a bit outdated there, but we've hired a Miami advocate and we're continuing to expand our work there as well. In Missouri, I mentioned the Missouri Right to Start Act, which is the state legislation that was passed recently through the Missouri House, which covers taxation, non-compete restrictions, government contracting, and capital access. And in Arkansas, this is where we've been doing work supported by the Walton Family Foundation. We have 3 local advocates on the ground. We've hired them to do ecosystem building and policy advocacy. They talk with entrepreneurs. They understand the burdens and the challenges of the entrepreneurs in those communities. And then they take those issues and those barriers and they talk about them. And so what's been happening in Arkansas is actually just in the last few weeks has expanded dramatically. Damara Baker, who's one of our advocates in Arkansas, has the city of Fayetteville, where she lives, embraced her work, she's an entrepreneur herself, took a lot of the concerns that she'd been hearing about in the local community from entrepreneurs and has started embedding them into the plans for the city of Fayetteville's economic strategy for 2022, including right now, potentially waiving the new business fees for young businesses in the city of Fayetteville and more. And so we're hearing a lot of feedback from entrepreneurs in real conversations. It's not just what we think they're asking, it's what they're actually asking about, because we're talking to them to understand these problems. And some of these problems are the simplest things, like the first-year license fee. A lot of people don't think it's a big deal, but it's a huge deal for new businesses because it's intimidating, it costs money, it takes time, and it creates more process and burden for people to get off the ground. And so here's an example of what we've done in Arkansas, which is a potential example for what we can do in a lot of other places as well. We have local advocates representing the Hispanic, Latinx, and the Marshallese communities. They're trained and supported by our team. They meet and learn stories of the actual entrepreneurs in Arkansas, and they take those lessons, they share those stories with local policymakers and other entrepreneurs. They take those findings, we share them with the Walton Family Foundation, but we also create better policies for entrepreneurs, and those stories end up in the media. And so we've actually been able to start to generate a feedback loop of people in the community talking about these issues, from the governor to statewide officials, to state representatives and state senators, to local entrepreneurs, and local civic leaders engaging these issues. And Damara wrote an op-ed that was placed recently in a statewide paper in Arkansas about some of the issues she's been hearing about, which created a lot of ripple effects and is starting to change policies in Arkansas too. So a preview of our work in New Mexico. So what are we looking to do in New Mexico? And we're really getting geared up for this. And there's 3 main aspects of this work. One is to elevate awareness and engagement. 2 is communications and media, and 3 is organizing and mobilizing. And so that can be a range of different types of activities, from communications and civic engagement, featuring diversity, highlighting the challenges and barriers of entrepreneurs, promoting a number of initiatives and organizations. For instance, in Nashville, where we're working, we've actually been highlighting We're not even highlighting ourselves in one particular case. We're highlighting the local work that's happening with entrepreneurs that are underserved in the Black community, and the needs that they're facing, as well as organizations that are serving them, just to get these issues on the agenda, because they haven't been in the agenda in Nashville as much as they should. So we're actually doing work to lift up those stories in the media and in the local community. Advancing inclusive entrepreneurship, engaging local citizens, and engaging civic leaders and policymakers. And when we think about civic leaders and policymakers, we really do think not just the elected officials, which are a lot of what people think about, even though we definitely engage with elected officials, but we think about the chambers of commerce, the economic development associations, school systems, other types of civic associations of many kinds. All these affect the fabric of life for entrepreneurs, and they all have something to do, and they all have things to improve. And so by lifting up the voices of entrepreneurs, getting them involved in the process, we're actually able to start seeing change happen in different places. And then we do activities to celebrate entrepreneurs, to lift up these concerns when the entrepreneurs are starting a new business, or they're pivoting a business, or launching a new product line. We're featuring that and trying to elevate those stories as well. Some examples of what we're doing in the media. I mentioned I write for Inc. every month. I also write for Make magazine, but we've also gotten national exposure in The Hill and The Atlantic, Insider and City Lab, Bloomberg, and a number of other publications. And the whole point is to get these stories out there and get people talking about them. And a lot of these stories we write are actually stories of individual entrepreneurs on the ground and the challenges and the struggles they face, because we think those are critical. And if you can't put a face on it, it's really hard to understand these issues in the abstract. And so we do a lot of work around actually giving people very tangible, accessible stories of what's happening in entrepreneurial communities. So thank you very much for supporting the work of Right to Start, supporting the ideas of the rainforest. And I'm available to chat for a bit. In fact, I'd love to talk with you all about what you all think we can do in New Mexico, and what you think about these ideas, and what you think about the importance of the Right to Start in whatever aspect of the work it is you're doing. So thank you, Lisa, Kara, and the whole team for having me here. Thank
you, Victor. And let's open it up with some questions. If you want to put them in the chat, that would be great. The first question there is, what are the key attributes and/or experience you look for in advocates?
The advocates we're hiring they should represent a perspective on entrepreneurship that typically isn't heard. And so what we're looking for are the people who understand the voices of entrepreneurs, who have often been left out of the conversation. But then they also have the ability to engage. So they have to be people. They'd be as comfortable in front of an entrepreneur, or a mayor, or a civic leader, or a teacher, or someone who's just who's a student fresh out of school thinking of starting a business. So someone who is very comfortable in being a connector and hearing about those issues and giving voice to some of the concerns of entrepreneurs. But we're not looking for anything fancy. We actually are looking for people that really, they don't have to be super polished. In fact, I think in many ways we're looking for people that haven't had the chance before and are just looking for a chance to give voice to these issues.
Great, David Foster, thank you. He thanks you for your fine presentation and for your efforts. His question is, who are the main opposition, and what kinds of objections do they offer, and how do you educate them?
So it's really interesting, and this experience we had with the Missouri House, I think, started to show that most people will say they support entrepreneurs because, of course, what's not to like about people trying to start businesses and grow them, and there's something that people feel like they can get behind. The challenge is when you start to realize that there are trade-offs in a society. And so if you're trying to say, for instance, argue that some government contracts should go towards young businesses, for instance. So we advocate for what we call 5% to start, which is, there's a lot of government funds and support that go towards large corporations disproportionately. And so if you think about economic development subsidies, workforce training, which goes almost entirely towards job skill placement in large corporations, and you think about government contracts, which go very largely towards incumbents who won before that because they know how to work the contracting system and they know how to access those types of awards. You realize that if you want to shift some of that over, if you want to shift 5% of economic development money from large incumbent corporations to entrepreneurs and young businesses, if you want to do that for workforce, if you want to do that for government contracting, it's not much if you think about it in relative terms. It's just 5%. You can still keep 95% of it going the way it's been going, but you start to raise questions because now you're starting to realize that there are trade-offs in a society. And all we're saying is 5% is just to level the playing field because it's so hard for entrepreneurs to get access to those types of resources. Economic development is in the many tens of billions of dollars, upwards of $70 billion a year in this country. Almost all that support goes towards large incumbents. Workforce training is $30 billion a year or more. Almost all of that goes towards supporting job skills training for job placement. And government contracting, almost countless amounts of money go through government contracts, almost all towards large incumbent firms. And so shifting 5% of it actually is a trade-off, and you do find people that don't prefer not to engage in making those trade-offs. The other thing is certain types of contractual restrictions start to rise up as well. So non-compete restrictions are a thing. So large corporations, if those of you that may or may not be familiar with non-competes, if you're not familiar with it, essentially a lot of contracts are made saying that if you work for one company, you can't leave that company and compete against them later on. And what that does is it creates a job lock for people. Often the skills they have their greatest strength or specialization in, now they can't actually go and start their own firm, not to mention go start and work for a competitor, but they can't actually take that skill and start their own thing. And so a number of states now are increasingly moving towards limiting those non-compete restrictions or banning them outright. A few states actually banned them outright, and the research shows that actually the more you eliminate non-compete restrictions, the more you increase incomes, the more you increase job mobility, the more you increase longer-term growth. But large corporations tend to like them because by keeping people in a job lock, you actually help out incumbents. And so we have found that a lot of large corporations like non-compete covenants. They like to keep them in place. They spend a lot of money to hire people. They don't want to lose them, which is understandable in certain cases when certain employees are heavy investments or they have to recruit them from different geographies. But you do hear people get opposed to these. And I think the point is when you start to put these issues out there and actually start to require people to pick from one side or the other, you do make trade-offs. And I think that's one thing that entrepreneurs haven't been very good at, is we haven't actually pushed the issues out there. If everyone loves you, that means you're actually you're not asking people to make choices. And so we're going to find more and more that we are going to be asking people to make choices. And that's what a society should do. We're not asking for favors as entrepreneurs. We're just asking for a level playing field. And really that's what we're pushing for.
In New Mexico, Victor, we have a program called JTIP, Job Training Investment Program. And over the years, it's been interesting to watch the change, because now I think we see a number of small and startup companies getting access to those funds, which allow a small company to create one or two jobs and get funding for that first maybe year of employment. It's been really, really helpful for our small businesses. So that's a good thing. Okay, related to that, another question is, have you seen any particular resistance or concerns from elected officials?
Yes, I think a lot of it, well, I would say one is generally elected officials, the general response has been extremely positive because a lot of them do care about entrepreneurship. A lot of them are entrepreneurs themselves, or they've known entrepreneurs themselves. And what we found is that generally they're thrilled we're here because they didn't know that there was a body of ideas that could be packaged up to fight for entrepreneurs. And so generally people have been really excited and responsive. I think a lot of the questions will come, I think anytime you have something new, the questions are around, well, what does this look like in practice? What does the data look like in terms of outcomes and specific outputs? What does this look like over time? And those are answers, anytime you start something new, you don't have all those answers. We do know if we can show success stories in in various pieces of it, but a lot of the things we're talking about haven't been done at large mass scale before. But we know they all make sense in different pieces together. We're just stitching them together for the first time. And so for some elected officials, they like to have more specifics in terms of what does this look like after 3 years or 5 years? And we don't have all the answers to all those, but we do have enough evidence that we can say very confidently that these things are good choices to make.
And then a comment that says your other stats besides creation of jobs about the impact on all the community that could activate people who are not actually entrepreneurs or hopefuls. So I guess that's part of what we would call our supporting infrastructure that we need to be mobilized as well.
Well, that's really it. The thing about if you only ask entrepreneurs to support on entrepreneurial policies and issues, then you're not going to have a critical mass, because by the time someone's an entrepreneur, they have no time and no money to get involved in these things. They're just busy trying to get their business going. And so the right to start is really a basic right. Just like you have a right to speech, you have a right to worship. It's a right that everyone is born with. And what we're really saying is this is everybody. This is not just the person who's slogging away in a garage or a basement now trying to build a business. This is you, this is your family, this is your friends, this is your neighbors, and their fundamental right to start. Just like you've got a right to speech and a right to worship, you've got a right to be entrepreneurial. It's embedded. You have a right to take your God-given talents and make something of yourself and create that path for yourself. And the truth is there's a lot of obstacles in the way, and it's not a fair playing field. And everyone should care about this, because it's really about giving you options in life, giving your family options, giving your children options in life. And it has to do with all of us. So yes, absolutely, 100%.
Another comment and a question. The person says, I do not hear very much locally about rainforests, unicorns, artificial intelligence, fourth industrial revolution, the new economy, the role of technology in economic growth, and changing culture is seen by some as racist. How can these barriers be addressed?
Well, that's a big, profound question. Well, here's the way we're trying to tackle this with Right to Start, is by talking about how these are not, when we talk about things like the fourth industrial revolution, for a lot of people, it comes across as, well, that's for a very lucky few people that benefit from that. Technological innovation has benefited, a few percent at the expense of everybody else. And the thing about the Right to Start is we're trying to expand the vision of what's possible in a modern economy. When we have tools, everyone now has tools at their fingertips, their phones and their laptops, that do what would have been considered magic even a couple decades ago. You can sit in your bathrobe at home over Zoom, and you can tap supply chains around the world. You can tap marketing channels across the world. You can basically design and build and prototype almost anything that your heart desires. You can build world-changing businesses that would have required thousands of people and millions of dollars, and you can do that over a weekend today. You have tremendous power. What we have not done is to build an economy and a government and a system that actually enables that and makes it powerful and easy. And so people don't know how to do it. We create barriers for them. We make it hard. We create obstacles. We have not created a system that really gives people the power that these tools talk about. If you really think about the fourth industrial revolution, it could go either way. You could have a fourth industrial revolution that ruins people's lives, or you could have a fourth industrial revolution that liberates people and frees them up. And so what the Right to Start is saying is, we've got to make that happen, to make that better version happen. We've got to empower people. We've got to give them economic and political power, and we've got to democratize that so everyone has access to it. And I think that's one of the challenges with a lot of futurism, is the futurism doesn't seem like it applies to everybody. And what Right to Start is saying, there's something bigger than technology, which is everyone's right to access the tools to innovate in their own way and to create economic value in their own way. And in fact, if we don't do that, I think we'd end up with more of a dystopic society than a utopic one. So that's the vision of Right to Start, is really to try to right the system before the tools overwhelm us and we propagate a lot of these inequalities.
One of the things New Mexico is doing, Victor, is the state established an office of broadband. And so the goal here is to get to rural parts of our state so that it does democratize a bit more the access to the internet, to tools that can be used for people for their entrepreneurial efforts and really remote work as well. So I think, New Mexico has identified that as an issue, and hopefully that'll be something that's much better in the future.
Absolutely. And Lisa, you've been kind in connecting us to a number of the tribes and also others in the community. And with Right to Start, what we really want to do is to provide lift up some of those voices, to give those people and their issues and their concerns a chance. So these opportunities are widely available to everybody.
All right, another question. How receptive are the editorial departments of American business city journals to your messages, and do you have their support?
That's an interesting question. We have not pitched the editorial departments about this yet in those city business journals. It's a good idea though. We just haven't done it yet, and so we don't have their support or their opposition. I think largely they'll support it because I think this expands the number of people who feel like business is relevant to them. I think a lot of people, frankly, don't feel like entrepreneurship and business is relevant to them because it's something that other people have the privilege to do. Right to Start is saying we all have the privilege to do it, and not only that, we have the right to do it. And so hopefully the business journals would see this as a chance to increase their relevancy to a broader number of people. But yes, that's a great idea. We have not done that, even though we have. I think we pitched some op-eds to business journals, but I don't know if any of them have been picked up yet. But it's certainly something we care about.
Another question, in the communities where you have established Right to Start, what are the main barriers you have seen for the entrepreneurs? And what kind of policies have you been able to create to help break down those barriers?
It's well, we're only about a little over a year old, so we're still a young organization. But what we found is the issues that actually matter to the real entrepreneurs in a community are not necessarily the ones that get a lot of noise and attention. So in Northwest Arkansas, for instance, the issue that actually rises up the most, which has been surprising to a lot of people, but not as surprising to me, but surprising to a lot of people, is that the business assistance information is not available in Spanish. And it sounds so obvious, and it's not a really expensive thing to tackle. But if you're asking people to fill out forms and you're offering support services, and a city's trying to do all this work for entrepreneurs, but they can't understand it, well, that's just kind of those are wasted resources. So simple things like translate your materials into the language of the people that you're trying to reach has been one of these things that just surfaced up tremendously in the work. And so that's one. Another has been the importance of permits and licensing fees. Some people would be surprised by that. I wasn't totally surprised by how important that is, but it's become a huge issue, which is, half this country lives paycheck to paycheck. And if you're asking someone to fill out another form and pay another $100, well, you've probably just killed their dreams because they don't have $100 and they don't have time to fill out a new form. So why do we make it so hard for people trying to start something, especially in their first year? Well, save it for the second year or third year. But the first year, when they've just decided to stick their necks out and try something, we should make it a little bit easier for them. And so that's the kind of stuff that comes out when you have these real conversations and you start to capture that in data and you start to actually measure it. You start to realize the simplest barriers become huge barriers for people that are just starting out.
Okay. And a comment, Right to Start seems to be a bottom-up model which empowers people and communities to pursue their entrepreneurial aspirations instead of feeling like changes and growth are being dictated by the 1%. This is important when working with underserved communities. Give the power and voice to the people. I love the concept.
100%. I mean, it sounds so obvious, doesn't it? It sounds so obvious that if you want to make changes to help people, you should actually listen to them and talk to them. And what we're trying to do is to enable that at scale and to empower people's voices. And because one of the beauties of a democracy is that the voices of the people should matter in the system. But for some reason, we've created a system that doesn't hear the voices of entrepreneurs, particularly those that need help the most. And what we also know is how important they are to our collective prosperity, that if the entrepreneurs who need help the most are left out and we're not making changes to improve their chance of success, we all lose from that. We all make less money, we have less products and services, we all have less wealth, we have less mobility as a society, the whole society slows down. And so absolutely, Cecilia, thank you for your comment. I think that's really it. It's, you know, let's unleash people's aspirations and their voices, and we will solve this together. You know, sometimes, you know, especially in politics now, there's a sense that, you know, we look to the politicians to fix the problems for us, but that's really not how the system should work. We should look to ourselves, but we also have to give ourselves a chance, and we have to let the voices of the people come out and adjust to those needs and fix those types of problems.
Victor, I think we want to help people be able to start businesses. And I think a second point that's really important is to help those businesses survive, because the statistics are that new starts have a difficult time, you know, surviving. So I think right to start will also be really important for those early stage entrepreneurs to make it.
Well, that's really it. You know, the entrepreneurs die deaths of a million cuts. It's not just a single blow. They you know, if you've ever started a business before, it's one thing after another. It's one day after another, new things coming at you all the time. The role of a society should be to eliminate as many of those as we possibly can. And those come in many forms. It's not just taxes and regulation, which is often what gets a lot of attention, but it comes in terms of biases and access and lack of open doors and, you know, things that are hard to understand, or lack of access to capital, or different types of capital don't serve the needs. There's just so many things that get in the way of entrepreneurs trying to make something happen. Which means it's a whole 360 problem, right? Entrepreneurs live in a 360 world where everything affects their success. The problems are 360 problems, which means our solutions have to be 360 solutions as a society. And so you're absolutely right, Lisa. The challenge of how to keep a company sustained and growing is a 360 issue, because all those cuts start to pull you down over the course of several years. By 5 years, half the businesses are gone, which means that they just couldn't make it through the gauntlet that the process requires. So our job should be to remove as many of those obstacles as we possibly can, and that's how we increase those numbers and see businesses last longer.
Okay, well, I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I would like to thank you for talking with us today, and we really look forward to working with you on the Right to Start project and seeing how that can really impact our entrepreneurial ecosystem here in New Mexico. So thank you, Victor.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you to everybody for being part of it. Thanks to all the great questions got there. Thank you, Cecilia Pacheco, for your great comments. And we love working with you guys and look forward to a great year ahead on this project.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.